FearlessFlight Live. It must be Tuesday night. What was that old book? If it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. That was about traveling way back when Dieter wasn't even a glint in his dad's eye in those days. So anyway, he won't know that. But anyway, welcome everybody. This is FearlessFlight Live, and it's a place where you can come if you have fear flying, or if you know somebody who's got a fear flying, or if you just plain like to talk aviation, and particularly commercial aviation. We're back again every week, and for you, we hope that you'll find some value here tonight. And please, if you have questions, don't keep them to yourself. Put a comment in Facebook there, and Dieter will hopefully pick that up. So let me share my screen first. I want to do this and everybody up there. And
by the way, welcome back, Captain Eric. You had
had
a trip out to the East Coast, and I guess you caught a little bit of winter too.
Yeah, we did, but it worked out well, and it was a stressful thing for a flight attendant. But I got to meet her brother, and he's doing well, and so I was really glad to have the time with him. So yeah, it was a good trip.
Well, it's good to have you back. Ron, can you please just diminish those two reminders on the screen?
I just did it. They didn't like it apparently. Okay. Perfect. Here we are with our weekly show, and we like to mention, do a shout out for our Facebook group, private Facebook group, Fearless Flight, Birds of a Feather, for anybody out there that's looking for a group to hang out with and share your wisdom and growth and all your achievements, and leave a comment. We welcome, giving and receiving information. That we're up over around 1,500 and getting stronger. So we like to encourage anybody out there who's not sure what to do for the next step to join that. It's a great place to go, and it's free. And so tonight we have a special guest, Professor Arnold Barnett, and he's somebody that I started following in post 9/11. I always used to get kind of cranked about some of the statistics out there, and other than my college classes where I had to take that in my master's program to review it, I was looking for somebody who had some really good information, and I saw a YouTube piece that Professor Barnett did, and it was awesome. And waited for years, didn't think that he would want to talk to a lowly pilot like me, and boy, was I surprised. I wrote him back in 2019, and he actually has had some family out in Southern California, and we were about to put on a class at the studio, the Air Hollywood studio, and he graciously came up and put on part of the presentation, and he's been somebody who has supported us ever since. And so tonight, well, I'll hold off for a minute. Anyway, he's waiting in the wings there, so I'll get through this. The 301 graduation flight, if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to go over to the website. We'll have all these links in the notes following the show. And also the 201 live monthly group coaching webinar is coming up again on February 15th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Anybody out there, I got a lot of people showing up for 15-minute coaching sessions. It's free. I totally encourage you to do that. If you don't know what to do for the next step, please consider signing up for one of those. And we're doing EMDR now. It's available in all of the 60-minute coaching sessions. The last month's monthly group coaching session, we talked in detail about that. We're going to touch on that again in the classes coming up, and probably touch on that again in the coaching class on the 15th. And as always, we welcome, like I said, your comments and everything. So this is the theme for the next coaching webinar. I know it's safe to fly, but why do I still freak out at the thought of getting on the damned airplane? And that's really kind of the topic tonight of Professor Barnett's information here, and looking at odds and stuff. And I like to tell people, if you weren't, people tell me, I know it's logical and I know it's safe, but why am I still bothered? Well, it's a different part of the brain that's causing the problem, number one. But when you get right down to it, if you weren't afraid of something going wrong, you wouldn't be worried about feeling trapped and getting out of there. So we're going to talk about the statistics tonight and what is going on in the aviation industry. More and more people have been joining us in the coaching webinar, so I hope that you'll be one of them and come and join us on Thursday, or the 15th, that is. Okay, there was an article on the Hill online about a week and a half ago, I think I first saw it, and it talked about all the incidents in the news lately. And is it really safe to fly out there? And so I thought no better. And when I looked at the author of the opinion piece, it was Professor Barnett. So I thought, oh, cool. It might be a great time to reconnect with him. And so I'll ask him to come on here. He is our special guest, and I'll stop the share. He's going to talk about and answer questions. Whoops. Okay, there we go. So Arnie, if you want to join us, we're welcome and happy to have you here.
Well, hi, excuse me, I will try to, let's see. Okay.
There you are. Thanks.
There I am. Hi.
Welcome.
Hi.
And what was the occasion? Were you just sitting down there? Yeah. And well, first of all, I'd like to share with people that you at once, I think you confessed to having an anxiety over flying. And,
yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah. So maybe start out with that to give people a little background here. They think they're the only ones out there.
I'm probably older than most of the people, on this Facebook presentation. And, there was a time when, first of all, not many people flew compared to now. And secondly, crashes occurred frequently enough, that if you did a word association test, if you said the word plane, an awful lot of people, and I was among them, would have said crash as the follow-up word. In fact, I don't know whether any of you watched the Twilight Zone, the episodes in the early Twilight Zone. Well, there were no fewer than 4 shows on the Twilight Zone about plane crashes, because there was so much a part of the popular imagination at that time. And I myself was afraid to fly. And I remember it to the extent that, for example, if I was flying on Friday, by Wednesday, I would start feeling this nervousness about it, and when I got on the plane, I would worry about what the turbulence would be like, etc. So there's no doubt that I felt a great deal of fear. And in that sense, I have a great deal of understanding, empathy, I guess, literally empathy with people who are afraid to fly. I understand it. I was part of it. And I don't know whether or not there's a cure. I myself am not really afraid to fly now. Even so, I don't like turbulence. Okay, when I'm in turbulence and it's getting worse, I sort of know that the plane is not about to fall apart. But nonetheless, I'm not happy. I'm not at ease until the turbulence diminishes. So it's not that I'm totally immune to fear of flying and anxiety about it, but I've gone pretty close. And I was an assistant professor, at MIT, and junior faculty are expected to write papers, publication, publish or perish, not in the sense of perish in a plane crash, but perish in the academic atmosphere. And
I'm glad you made that distinction.
yeah. And I remember thinking, how might I deal with my fears of flying in a way that might be publishable? So in terms of journal articles. And I just started doing calculations. And one of the things I found was that you really didn't have many simple calculations of what are the odds of, let's say, dying in a plane crash, that there were calculations that I think were statistically misleading, if not outright meaningless. So I guess I was sort of lucky. I wrote the paper, and it turned out that a lot of people were interested in the risk of flying. And the paper got a certain amount of attention. And because of that, I actually got opportunities to work in other areas related to aviation safety. So, for example, when the FAA wanted risk assessments about runway collisions or mid-air collisions, I was asked about that. I was also asked about excuse me, about security measures,
Mhm.
whether or not it really is worthwhile engaging in positive bag match. This is a security measure in which if a person checks a bag for a flight and doesn't show up, the bag does not travel. And by the way, I don't know, many of you are too young to remember Pan Am 103, but this was a Boeing 747 that went down because an unaccompanied suitcase contained an explosive device. So
Yeah.
I was asked at the FAA at the time, and then it became the Transportation Security Administration. And I've also been asked, along with others, to engage in safety analyses about for particular airports, and especially Los Angeles International. The question was whether they needed to move certain runways further apart in the interest of greater safety. You can imagine the neighbors of LAX were not happy with this proposal. So then there was the question, well, how safe is it? How urgent is it to move the runways further apart, taking into account the various new safety measures that exist? So in that sense, I've had a chance to work on safety from a number of perspectives, including how safe is it, and also what can we do to make it safer. And I must tell you that I am much less frightened now, and I can talk to you more about it. Let me just tell you something, though. I do statistics, and one of the things I did for the little article that I wrote a little over a week ago, and of course it's available on the Hill. I certainly can make sure anyone who wants to read it will get a chance to see it. I'm sure Ron can help make sure that it's
we'll leave
available.
a link. Yeah, we'll leave a link in there.
But I started looking at the United States. I mean, we have some of the best safety around the world, I think you could say. So overall statistics about the world themselves are highly encouraging. And that safety has gotten better and better every decade. In fact, the worldwide pattern is the following. Every decade, the risk of dying in a plane crash, if you're a passenger, anywhere around the world, has gone down by about a factor of 2, meaning it's only in the 1990s, it was only half as risky as the 1980s, and the 1980s are only half as risky as the 1970s, etc. Well, that's gone on for 5 decades. So now, worldwide, the risk of flying is only 1/38 as high as it was, let's say, 50 years ago, in the late 60s and early 70s, for instance. That means that, for example, it was 38 times as high then as it is now. And the interesting thing is that you might think, well, as it gets safer, it's going to be hard to continue this factor of 2 improvement. There'll be the low-hanging fruit, as they call it, will already have been consumed. So now it gets harder and harder. And yet, despite that, that's what's happened. It's happened up until now, again and again, a factor of 2. But that's the worldwide. In the United States, if you looked at the 5 years, 1958 through 62, going back, in other words, I guess that's, 58 to 62 would be, let's see, that would be 60 years ago, actually. I'm thinking about 60 years compared to the last 5 years. And I looked at the frequency of crashes. I looked at how many flights there were, how many passengers there were. And then I said, what would happen if the risk of death in flying were the same in the United States now as it was then? Okay. In other words, the last 5 years, as opposed to the 5-year period 60 years earlier. Well,
would you like that slide with, excuse me, Arnie, would you like that slide with those statistics on that? Is that helpful?
Well, the statistics I have are actually, those are the worldwide statistics.
Oh, okay.
And the American statistics are even more encouraging.
Okay, got it.
Anyway, if it had been the case, let me just tell you, that we had the same rate of risk of death in flying in, let's say, 2022 as we had 60 years before. Do you know, over the 5 years, 2018 through 2022, we would have had 12,500 deaths among U.S. passengers, among the many millions of passengers, 12,500 deaths.
That's just in the U.S.
Yeah, that's the U.S. That's
just
the U.S. Yeah, I mean, because we had much less flying then. I mean, you might have, let's say, 100, 200 deaths a year, but then that wasn't that many people flying.
Yeah.
Now, anyway, now if you actually look what happened in the last 5 years, the number of deaths in the US was 11. From 12,500, it's gone down to 11 deaths. And by the way, some people wouldn't even count those 11 because one of the planes that went down was sort of a what do they call it? The water plane, etc. Float plane. I forget what they call it. It was not the kind of thing you would wind up getting on at SFO at San Francisco International. But I counted it because it was a scheduled flight. That's 11 deaths out of 3.7 billion passengers. And I'll tell you, at that rate, at that risk level, if you took one flight every day, on average, you could go 922,000 years before succumbing to a fatal crash. And while I wish everyone on on this presentation a very long and happy life, none of us are going to live 922,000 years, etc. And I mean, it's really, if you believe the statistics, and I do, basically, it doesn't make more sense to be afraid to fly than to be afraid to go into the supermarket because you fear the ceiling's about to collapse. In other words, we have risks every day. Everything we do entails risk, but once the risk gets low enough, we simply don't worry about it. Okay? I think, and I know it's unintuitive, but I think that if we look at the actual record, then we see that the risk of flying is so small, we really shouldn't worry about it. And let me say one more last thing about the recent events, and then I'm obviously happy to answer questions of any kind. But people are frightened now because, look, when I saw the picture of the JAL Japan Airlines plane, which had been in the accident, the collision at Tokyo, and it was utterly engulfed in flames. The picture was, this bright orange. Believe me, it was not relaxing. But of course, the fact is, everyone did get off that plane. And it took them, by the way, 18 minutes to get off, it turns out. They said you're supposed to be out in 90 seconds. Well, it took 18 minutes. But the reason that everyone was able to get out is that these planes are built with new materials, that are very fire resistant. They could not put out the fire. They could not prevent the fire, but they could slow the fire down to such an extent that 367 passengers got out, despite the fact that the plane was, to say the least, totaled, as we would say. Similarly, of course, we have the event with on the Boeing plane, where we noticed that now we know that there are some artificial exits that are at the windows, and as we saw, one of them came out, and now they say the reason is that the bolts that were supposed to hold them in may never have been installed in the first place. But that's very frightening. But again, it's now that these events have occurred, actually we're safer than ever, because one of the reasons people die when planes, for example, wind up crashing on landing is that when they're trying to get out, people try to reach for the overhead carry-on bag, and they block the passengers. There have been a lot of incidents. Well, in Japan, where among other things, people pay attention to the rules, and they had excellent flight. The flight demonstration, the warning you get at the beginning, the opening,
the safety briefing
presentation, the safety. They stressed, don't grab for your bag. Now that we've seen that, people are less likely to grab for their bags if the same emergency arose. Similarly, it's extremely important to keep your seatbelt fastened while you are seated, as they say. And part of the reason is that it does protect you in case something suddenly would tend to suck you out. Well, in this instance over here, luckily, the fact that people had their seatbelts on contributed to the fact that no one was seriously injured when we had the rapid decompression. And now we know it, we understand it better, because we're reminded that if people were sitting right next to that window that suddenly opened up and without a seatbelt, it would have been very hard to stay within the plane. But at least if you have the belt on, the chance of not being sucked out in a circumstance like that is a lot lower. And it's also true that, look, I mean, terrorism, we don't forget terrorism because every time we go through the airport, we have to go through the security measures. I think we got to the point, unfortunately, or fortunately, that terrorism seemed such a remote risk. To be honest, I'd forgotten about it. But on the other hand, now we're reading that with the tension in the Middle East, with Israel and Hamas, people are starting to worry that there may be a resurgence of terrorist acts. And if that's the case, unfortunately, aviation has been a target. But it's probably better that we realize that because we have to go back to the time where if we see something, we have to say something. So, in other words, what's happened recently did not take any lives, but it reminded us of things we have to do so that future events don't take lives. And the extraordinarily spectacular record will be continued. I say that aviation is in the United States, is the eighth wonder of the world. And I don't know, I think this will sound a little modern, I think we should be thankful. Who is responsible for this? Well, certainly the airlines, certainly the aircraft manufacturers, yes, including Boeing, even though it's going through a bad patch at the moment. The governments and people, by the way, the fact that the public has zero tolerance for plane crashes, all of these things have come together to create a safety system which is practically unknown anywhere in the world. I once gave a presentation for some medical doctors, and the issue was, couldn't they learn something from the airlines, about procedures? And I was just to give a 5-minute introduction. I said, if people come flying to Boston, we're proud in Boston, we have excellent medical facilities. I said, if people come fly to Boston, they are 55,000 times as likely to die because of a mistake in the hospital as on the plane taking them to Boston. So if you want to worry, believe me, there are things in the world to worry about, but aviation is not really among them. So I understand, as I said, that people feel nervous, very much so, because I felt it for a long time. But now I've gotten to the point where I think that there are plenty of things I worry about. I mean, I'm from New York City, and worry is sort of second nature to us, but not flying. The flying we do is genuinely safe.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, what comes to mind is one of the things that comes to mind is the collateral impact of aviation accident investigation. One of the best things about when we have had crashes, first of all, I always say it's no longer Orville and Wilbur's airline anymore. So the advancements that we made in both human factors and technology have really attributes to a large part of the increased safety. But the other thing is, I use as an example, Sully's Miracle on the Hudson. I think they came out with 35 major findings on that. Only 5 dealt directly with the issues that caused them to end up in the Hudson. There were 30 more that are collateral to other issues that they learned from as a result of that accident. And that's why it's the forensic investigations of the airlines for long has been responsible for the future safety, and it's just enormously.
Well, that's totally true. And you talk about that event. Let's talk about Airbus. One of the things that Captain Sullenberger, who came to MIT actually and visited us, but one of the things that helped him greatly was that when he was worried about how to get down safely into the Hudson, the Airbus 320 would take care of all the household chores in regular flying. And more dramatically, there was another Airbus, the Airbus 380, the biggest one. And there was a flight on Qantas, a wonderful airline, Qantas Flight 32, where there was a terrible explosion on the Airbus, an engine explosion, and all kinds of damage. And the plane itself not only told the pilots what to do, how to respond to the emergency, but it told them the order in which to do things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would add something else, almost as if you talk about artificial intelligence. The plane was talking to the pilots, said, by the way, now do this. And there were something like 100 instructions. And they managed to get the plane back to the ground safely. And there have never been any fatalities and crashes on the Airbus 380 or on the Boeing 787 or on the Airbus 350. You know, we had the Airbus 350 involved in this fire, but everyone survived.
Yeah.
So we're talking about new modern planes that have perfect safety records. And the reason, as you say, is absolutely remarkable things happen.
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah.
of the technology and everything else. I mean, lots of things were learned the hard way, but they have been learned.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, the public's intolerance of airline accidents and fatalities for sure does that. The on the other side of that, there was a similar accident in Toronto. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
probably
yes.
40 years ago. Same thing. The airplane was consumed in fire within 2 minutes, and everyone got off of that. And it's out. Both accidents are out of the news within 24 hours. They don't even make it, 24-hour
No,
news.
you're absolutely right. That was Air France in
Air
Toronto.
France, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And yes, everyone, and there they got out very quickly.
They did. They
They
did.
did. But yes, you're absolutely right that, and when they talk about the emergency measures, one should take that seriously because the risks are almost non-existent. But if there is something wrong, we may have to get out of the airplane fast.
And if I could pass a magic wand or they put me in charge, one of the things I would encourage more of the safety briefings that Southwest used to be inclined to do with a little humor and a little variation to hold people's attention, because that can be the most important thing, as you said, just not grabbing your bag in the overhead bin can save lives. And so
Absolutely.
but when you see that, and I'm guilty as that, you've heard it, you just ignore it. But it really is one of the most important things you can do. That and keeping your seatbelt fastened at all times, unless you need to be up out of your seat in the airplane. So, because the only people that get hurt in airplanes anymore are the ones that are not strapped in when you hit turbulence.
Yes, it can be turbulence, but even not if there is a problem of the type that they had on the Alaska plane, where all of a sudden, the pressure changes, then the seatbelt keeps you where you are. I mean, it's not foolproof, but
No.
it gives you a layer of protection you don't have without it.
Yeah, for sure. Dieter, I'm going to ask you, are there any questions that have come up or anything that from anybody out there?
Oh, he's muted. Dieter, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I just had so many windows open. There was one question that I think we might want to wait until after the interview.
Okay.
But I did have a question from a YouTube viewer, and that is how certain are you in your numbers? That's a good question. So I guess the person is more curious of how you arrive at these at those numbers.
Oh, okay. Well, some of the numbers are easy to get access to. I guess if you assume people are lying to us, then all numbers can be suspect. But for example, the Flight Safety Foundation publishes in its air safety, I think the air safety data set, whatever it's called, a listing of all the incidents in the course of the year in which anyone was killed. Certainly any passengers were killed, but even some incidents where no one was killed. I'm not sure exactly what the criteria are, but any sort of anomalies. They have these large listings, hundreds of events per year. The overwhelming majority involve no fatalities.
Yeah.
But then you have to say, well, first of all, okay, we know how many people were killed, for example. For each event, they will tell us how many were on board, how many were killed, and in most cases, what they list in the number killed was 0, okay? And what type of plane was it? What airline flew it? It gives us lots of information about every single crash. So I could go through, for example, and look at the listings in a given year. And of course, now, especially with the way we can manipulate data sets, So I can find out, for example, all of the crashes in the last 5 years on U.S. aircraft that led to passenger deaths and how many they led to. And that's how I got the number 11. That involved 3 events, actually, that led to a total of 11. But then the question is, well, how many people flew?
Yeah.
And there is information. The World Bank actually has a data set, passengers carried on scheduled airlines. In other words, the kinds of airlines where we're not talking about private planes, we're not talking about military flights or charter flights, we're talking about flights on Delta Airlines, for example. And they will tell us how many passengers flew in each recent year. So in other words, we know how many were killed. We know how many flew if we trust these data sets, and I do. And then we can work it out. Well, what is the rate? If I were to pick one person at random, one boarding pass at random from all the people who flew in the US over the last 5 years, what is the chance that that person would be the unlucky person to be among the 11 who died? And it's 11 over 3.7 billion is the actual risk, etc., which is something like 1 in 300 million, actually, for the US. But so that's how the numbers come. So if the question is, am I confident in the numbers? Yes, I am. I would also point out, though, that I write papers and they go through peer review, and the people who review them are people who are knowledgeable about aviation. And if they thought the data set was unreliable of a particular type, then they would say so. For example, for certain events, like let's say runway incursions, where 2 planes get too close together or a plane gets too close to a truck on the runway, there are suspicions that not all events are reported. So if I were to use the data there for the number of reported events and say that's equal to the full number of events, then some people would say, well, you were born yesterday, Barnett, because in fact, lots of events occur that don't get reported. But that's not true for fatal crashes.
Yeah.
It used to be true in the old Soviet Union that they would only report a crash if there were foreigners on board. But in the United States, I think that there's always been a reporting of crashes.
Yeah.
So I assume that all of them are reported, and I assume that the numbers of passengers that are estimated are very accurate estimates.
Yeah. And
Awesome. Thank you.
and other things that are reported as well. I mean, we live in the era of the iPhone, for God's sake. You get anything past anybody. And I used to tell pilots when I would brief them, talk about human factors, to say, if you make the news, you hope it's just the sidebar and not the headlines of the paper anymore, because you're going to make the news for the most insignificant things that happen. So it is like that. Yeah.
I was actually, sorry, I just want to throw that out. The way I read it, I thought whether or not there was any data set that's not publicly available, but what I heard you say is all the information that you collated and used for your calculations is in fact publicly
That's
available,
correct.
if you know where to look and if you care to do some digging.
No, that is absolutely correct. It's all publicly available data sets from data sources that are considered impeccable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think a problem with human beings is we understand possibilities more readily than we do probabilities. And when you get into huge numbers, especially. So when, I quote, a tier 1 airplane, your statistic, your chance of dying are 1 in 33.2 million. That's an old number now anyway. Yeah. But people will say to me, yeah, but you said 1 in 32.2 million, yes, Ron, you say 0. So it's just that it's counterintuitive. We just can't eliminate that. We can't get a good handle on risk.
No, I think you're right. But that was one of the reasons that I started talking about how long you could fly before you would finally succumb to crash. Because I talk to people, and if you say 1 in 20 million, you're right. The person who's afraid will say, I'll be the 1 in 20 million, which sounds kind of egotistical, but never mind.
Right.
Anyway, but then
you have to be arrogant on some level to be a fearful flyer as well.
Yeah, but to say, do you realize if you were to travel Saturday, Sunday, holidays included, every single day, you could go an average of let's say 512,000 years until a crash. Then I've had people change, their eyes change. 512 years? I'm not going to live 512 years. So I think what's happened is, and I think Captain Ron, you're saying exactly right. The way the numbers are presented have something to do with the way people react to them. People expect you to give a statistic which will make it sound very safe.
Exactly.
But the question is, can you put it in a way that's accurate,
Yeah.
that conveys how utterly minuscule the risk is?
And I alluded to my own frustration when I first came across your work, and maybe you can address this, but I can't tell you exactly what it was, but it was the way you measured risk as well. You know, to get to the 133, which was vastly different than what I was familiar with prior to that time, and it was a much more meaningful statistic in and of itself.
Well, simply to say, if you're really worried about the risk of being killed, then calculate the risk of being killed. So, for example, talking about hull losses of planes as a proxy for the risk. Well, but the Japanese flight a few weeks ago was totally a hull loss after the collision, and yet everyone got off.
Yeah.
So, in other words, the proxies that people were sort of using as a guide to risk, really, if you looked at the evidence, were not really very good guides.
Yeah.
I like your risk pyramid that you made for us years ago. So the person who says, yeah, but I'm next, and you can see the odds. And one of my favorite ones on the top is more likely to be elected president and have won an Olympic gold medal, or the chances of being whacked while you're walking on the sidewalk, which if you're in Phoenix are great. Just all this kind of stuff going on down there that has far more chances of ending your life than a plane crash.
Well, that's true, but I'll tell you something. I used to use the number that you were much more likely to win the jackpot in your state lottery than to die on your next flight. That number was totally unsuccessful because people furtively hope to win the lottery. I mean, you buy a lottery ticket, you don't stress how low the risk is. Deep down inside, you have a feeling I was born under a lucky star.
Yeah.
So I agree, that comparison doesn't work. Another one that I never found impressive was you're more likely to be killed by lightning, struck by lightning, than to die, let's say, in the plane crash. But I think that's strange because the whole point is we try to avoid being hit by lightning. When there's lightning outside, we're supposed to run inside, etc. So, of course, so lightning, we think in itself is inherently dangerous. So I don't know how, comforting it is to say that you're more likely to be hit by lightning.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I thought you have a knack for, is relating it to the common individual, in terms we think, because it's just, humans are just masters of eluding ourselves, and so.
Well, there's also something that I think you were referring to. I think the psychologists call it availability bias.
Absolutely.
Pointing out that something can go wrong leads to fear, even if the chance it will go wrong is 1 in a zillion.
Right.
They're simply reminding people of it. So that's why when we see these events and they say, oh my goodness, the window can suddenly disappear from the plane, or oh my goodness, this or that.
Yeah.
But I think we have to take into account that it almost never happens.
Yeah, and shark attacks are an element of that, and they show how ridiculous it is. And then you compare shark attacks even to dying in an airplane crash. It's even more, extraordinary. But you're right, the availability heuristic. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I don't know about shark attacks. I mean, I myself would worry. I know we on Cape Cod here in Massachusetts, we have sharks that seem to patrol the shoreline. So my intuitive feeling is that the risk is not that low. Can't be wrong.
Yeah, not as low as if you live in Wichita, Kansas, for sure. Yeah, and with shark attacks, I was listening to Jay Leno of all people, and he was talking about how we'll report. Well, you see a news thing that says shark attacks are up 100%. Well, that means there were 6 this year and 3 last year.
Yeah.
So so it borders on the ridiculous. So anyway, any other questions, Dieter? If not, we'll let Ernie go, and and I'll pass on. You've agreed to come back on the 15th and talk more, and we people have greater access to that. So
Oh, I would be glad to come back. And at your invitation once, I actually joined one of those flights out of Burbank.
I was going to say that. I was going to joke at the beginning and say, you weren't afraid until you came to one of my classes, and now you haven't flown since. But I thought that would be counterproductive. So
No, I remember though,
yeah.
I got up at one point, and just to talk to some of the people who were nervous
Yeah.
and they noticed the seatbelt sign was on. So one of them said to me, "What are you doing out of your seat?" And so I'm not sure it alleviated fear to the extent it should have. But look, I as I said, I have the extraordinary respect for people who recognize they're afraid and are trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I hope very much they succeed. And if I can help in any way, I'd be glad to.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You've added a significant dimension to what we put out, and I like you. I tell everybody that I ever come in contact with, pat yourself on the back, because like most things that befall us as human beings, about only 10% of the people who have this thing will seek help on it, and it's too bad, because overcoming fear of flying is one of the most successfully treated phobias. So, and thanks to people like you making the statistics more meaningful to people. I really appreciate that, Arnie. And thanks for coming again today.
Well, thank you for what you do, which has doubtless helped in not only all the people that that you've helped, but the people who talk to other people.
Yeah.
There are many people whose lives literally are better because they're not afraid to fly, that they go to Paris and things of that sort, and they wouldn't have without you. So.
Well, thanks. So anyway, we're looking forward to having you back on the 15th.
Okay.
And thank you for taking your time out tonight. And it's probably past your bedtime up there now. But so thanks for doing this late at night.
Take care. Good night.
All right.
Thanks, Dr. Barnett. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Night, everyone.
So we do have a couple of questions. I just wanted to wait with those two questions because they weren't statistic related. They were really more airplane related.
Yeah.
And so the first one is from Sharon, and she asks, how often do airliners stall? And if a stall does happen, do we drop out of the sky? So I guess there's a two-tiered question here. So,
Ron, if you let me jump in on this, I was thinking about it because Dieter flipped it to me while Dr. Barnett was talking. And Sharon, if you'll tune in next week, I can give you a good answer now. And the good answer is it's extremely rare, far even less frequent than accidents. Extremely rare, but there can be consequences. And if you'll tune in next week, I'll answer this more thoroughly because there's an aerodynamic answer, and then when this occurrence, when they had one or two occurrences in the last decade, the airlines developed a very intensive training program for the new people to address these issues, and it's a little more involved than I'd rather start into it at 8:15. So if you could hold on for a week, I'll be glad to address that next week.
Yeah, the short answer is never if you do it right, and never if certainly not close to the ground. But that's part of the inherent training. Every time Eric or I checked out in a different airplane, the first thing we do is define the flight envelope, of which the stall is a portion of that. When the airplane quits flying like you expect it to. So a great answer, Eric, and we'll look forward to that next week. So
maybe at that point we can also just point out what a stall is.
Sure. Yeah, we should do that, and so it's a longer answer than I'd rather start into right now.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
So before we get to the last question, Ron, why don't you you already have it on the screen. Talk about our.
I just want to remind everybody, if you're in the Phoenix area or going to be in the Phoenix area this coming Saturday night, we have our monthly Fear of Flying or Clifford Takeoff 101 class. and it's free. And all you have to do is go online, use that link, and you can register for that. I got at least 2 people driving in from Las Vegas. I think maybe a person from LA or so as well. And then the following morning, on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern time, I do the online version of the 101 class, and it's fresh information for anybody, regardless of what stage you're at in your overcoming your fear of flying. If you have questions, you're certainly welcome to join us. And so you can register for either one of those with the link. And so that's the main thing, other than the links that you'll see in there in the notes for the upcoming monthly group coaching session. So we look forward to having.
And Ron, let me just point out that if you do register for either of those free classes, either the one in Phoenix at the airport or the one online, you will also get access to our Cleared for Takeoff 101 Student Resource Center, and that you have access to meditation, you have access to other free offerings that we have for you. It's really a cool package. If you never checked that out before, I would highly encourage, and all you got to do is register for either the in-person class in Phoenix or the online class the next day right after.
Probably my biggest self-criticism is I never wanted to push myself anyway, so I would undersell things. And so Dieter said, you know what, we need a resource center so people can have a place to go, because the number one question people want to have an answer to is, what do I do next? And so Dieter and a lot of his effort went into this, creating this student resource center. So that was the short-term answer to anybody who comes to any of our events. You'll at least have a place to go to find out what you can do with a wide variety of cost, and with a lot of it free. So to get started, so there's no excuses for anybody not to do something to get over your fear of flying.
All right, let's end this with I guess I'm gonna give the smart ass answer first, and then I'll let you guys. Mary is asking genuinely though. Her daughter is flying to Qatar tomorrow, and it's a 13-hour flight. And her question is, how on earth does the plane fly that long? And my smart ass answer is by taking off from Earth, being built for the air, and that's actually, and I will say you guys can take it from here. So,
well, for me, a lot of planning, a lot of engineering, 120 years of experience since the Wright brothers first decided that they would throw something into the air, and plenty of fuel. So, and all I can say is I have flown from Qatar back to LA, and it was 16 hours. So she's got a 3-hour break, wherever she's flying from. But it is. And it is amazing. I remember last year I was flying from Tel Aviv to LAX, and it was about 15 hours. And I remember I woke up somewhere up over the pole. And of course, I wasn't anxious or anything, but I looked out the window and I was seated right next to the right engine on the airplane. And I just had a moment, when you first wake up, you're kind of fresh and you're vulnerable. And I remember looking at that engine, and it's huge. You can stand up in the intakes, it was a 787. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that thing's been going 9 hours already, and it's got another, 7 or so to go. It's just amazing how technologically reliable things are. And that to me is the best thing about aviation. When you say, Eric, big engines, they weigh less and they push more, and they're just
and the reliability compared to as Arnold was talking about, even the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
the reliability change is stunning.
And that generates questions from a lot of you about how do we fly those long distance over water. If you want, come back. We got the answers. We've got over water webinars that we've got in the 201 course, all that. So anyway, Thanks again. Thanks, Dieter. Thanks, Eric, and thanks to all of you for watching us. It's a joy to come and talk to you every week, and I hope you have a great week, and I hope you get into the air, because that's where it all happens. And the one thing about fear flying is you can't really prove it until you get into the air, out of your chair and into the air. So thanks. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here next week, everybody. Bye-bye.